Welcome back to Negotiating Reality, where we explore how we make sense of ourselves, each other, and the world. I'm your host, Eric Heckler. Today's conversation I hope you will truly enjoy because I really did. Our guest is John Kesler. He is someone with both deep wisdom and meditative and contemplative practices, and he has decades of leadership experience across many sectors. Before we get started, though, I really want to be transparent about something. John is a teacher of mine. I was introduced to him by a friend and collaborator, Kabir Cotter. And in particular, I first started by taking some online classes from him on his integral polarity practice, which you'll be hearing about. I then started getting one-on-one coaching with him. And now I'm getting more and more engaged in his training, such as I'm planning on taking one in January, two of them actually in January, one in person and one virtual. I wanted to start there, just sort of honor it to basically say, like, right now I want to actually share that this is very much a dialogue between teacher and student. Like I was just feeling so blessed that John was willing to spend this time to allow me to have him honestly just tell me his life, tell us his life journey, because it is really an amazing one that I think there's a lot for us all to learn from. And so I'm hoping you'll listen to this and hear this and hopefully also knowing this that there is a relationship here between me and John. Like, I hope that might even deepen some of the points. And particularly when we get to the end, when I offer a final reflection after an invitation John gave to me, I hope you can see why I think this is important to really have this personal relational connection as part of this. So with this, there's a few key highlights as sort of like the, teasers for you in case you're curious. One, this is very much related to the ideas that were discussed in episode 4 on beings adapt and the constructed nature of reality. Interestingly enough, John figured this out when he was a kid, and he's been working through it ever since. He had this really interesting experience that we'll talk about when he was identifying as a young atheist with zero meditative training and going and doing a fellowship in Hamburg, Germany, and sitting in silence and stillness and discovering a physical resonance that was the foundation of awareness that he could connect him to everything, to then his journey of becoming going to Columbia Law School and grappling with the ephemeral nature of language, to re-engaging with his Mormon roots and tradition, getting trained by Zen master Genpo Roshi in the big mind process, and eventually starting to develop over the past 20 years this integral polarity practice. And increasingly starting to applying it more and more towards training leaders in other work. So for me, I just think there's so much beauty and wisdom and learning from this story, particularly those like myself who have struggled with faith, who have struggled to understand what is actually something that I can trust and land on. I hope you can hear how John navigated it and navigated a lot of these tensions that I imagine a lot of us feel and might be feeling right now. And in so doing, I hope you can learn something from this work. And ultimately, I hope you can hear the invitation he's inviting, I think, all of us through the way he embodies walking in sacred beauty. So with that, we don't have much more. I invite you to sit back and enjoy this conversation. All right. Thank you so much, John, for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Eric. I appreciate your being interested enough to reach out.
Oh, it's truly my joy. Um, and so with this, I'd actually love to start this journey a bit with you. Really, honestly, you unpacking a little bit of your life journey, particularly as you shared in your book, Living in Sacred Beauty, The Origins and Emergence of Integral Polarity Practice, right? And because I think there are so many, maybe just to level this and like invite some of the folks who would be the audience in this, I think your life journey really, there's a lot of key moments that you shared that I think a lot of people would really share. And I think just how you navigated through them, I think is just could be really beautiful and instructive for others. And so that's kind of how I wanted to start this a bit. So with this, I want to start with your experiences in Germany first. You shared how you were a fellow at the University of Hamburg, and you shared how, particularly at that time, you had the capacity to probe deeply into a theme that was really dominating your youth, which you stated as the limits of the human mind. And at this time in your life, you did not have any formal meditative training, and yet you also described that you spent a significant amount of time in silence until you, quote, hit bottom and found a foundation, which you described as, and this is a quote, physical resonance, a sort of vibrancy that allowed me to feel or listen deeply from that place. It also included a sensibility of an awe-inspiring connection with everything. So that's beautiful. And I would love it if you could just bring us back to that and describe a bit of that experience, particularly at that moment in your life. And I want to also just tag at this time in your life, you shared that you were oriented towards more atheism as a frame. So I can only imagine what that must have been like at that particular moment. So could you just tell everyone a bit about that experience?
Sure. Just to put it in a little bit of context, for whatever reason, I grew up from at least junior high on, uh, just noticing that people's beliefs framework seemed to be constructed. Our perceptions were constructed, our narratives were constructed. And so I had that theme running, and I grew up in a very uh, religious environment, not in my own family, but I grew up in Salt Lake City, and the
Hmm.
neighborhood I was in was probably 90% Mormon. And I just grew up just noticing that, appreciating people who had faith backgrounds and faith traditions. Not very many people I ran into at all had no faith orientation.
Mm,
Uh, but by the time I graduated from college, I just thought, well, I think you just can't sit on the fence forever. You need to kind of take a leap of faith and see what happens. So I said, okay, my leap of faith is that I'm an atheist. It's kind of interested in science, and that seemed to have very, um, there's scientific explanations for the emergence of the universe and life,
hmm
and even frameworks of consciousness and how we operate. And I had sort of noticed the dynamics of the mind. But when I got this fellowship and went to the University of Hamburg, I found that there was, very few um, strict academic requirements. I was
hmm
pretty free to study what I wanted, go to the lectures that I wanted, and whatnot. And I just ended up with more open time than I had ever had in my life. So I thought, well, maybe here is an opportunity to get to the bottom of it, just saying I'm taking a leap of faith and this is what it is. And for whatever reason, rather than starting to read extensively, I just had an intuition that somehow if I went inside of myself, I might find something there.
mm,
And so it was like a 9 month retreat in a way. And about 6 months into it, of sitting in stillness and just sensing where did this belief come from? Where does this framework come from? And as everything started to deconstruct and evaporate, I mean, I was just falling into nothingness and, you know, losing weight. I mean, at that early age, my hair started to fall. I mean, I was just falling apart.
wow.
And yet I just thought, this is what I have to do. This is the search. And just at some moment, I can't even remember exactly what it was. I just remember at the bottom of the abyss, there was just sort of a resonance there. There was just something was there that I could touch into. And as I just sat with that and felt with it, I sensed that it was more than just sort of an energy. It was sort of a resonance with, it was just sort of connecting me with everything. And it
Mm,
was sort of, it also, uh, the more I leaned into something that seemed to bear fruit, the more I felt the resonance. So I felt like this was a little bit of a tuning fork. I didn't understand what it was, didn't have a background to understand what it was, but nevertheless, just sort of falling into this unique circumstance where I had a 9 month retreat about 6 months into it, where I became increasingly lost. I found a foundation, and that yeah, that was the start of something really important for me for the rest of my life.
wow, that's amazing. Such an experience and such a man, it's amazing that intuitive capacity you had growing up, right, as an adolescent of, now what neuroscience is really finding, as like shared in the previous thing of that constructed nature of our reality. So that's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, who knows where that came from? I mean, without reading anything, I created a junior high school science project on optical illusions and went to the state science fair with it. And I became sort of a, a hypnotist for parties in high school. And it was all, and all it was with me is I was just sort of playing with, how can you work with perception and people's sense of reality? And I didn't have any background on it, but it was just sort of it was just an opening I had that was a real interest to explore.
That's so cool, The Illusionist, and playing with it as a child, and now it's how it's grown and integrated. So with that, maybe continuing on with the story of that you shared, you are a lawyer. You went to Columbia Law School, right? And it was interesting how, like, for particularly the one that I found interesting. Again, you were still in this sort of atheist phase at this place, and you were really starting to, this is after you were in Germany, and you were really starting to explore the limits of language. And so this is a quote you said: "I had to admit that when I looked inward, consistent with what I found in Germany, language, concepts, meaning." And my identity all still seemed to be constructed and ephemeral. And so, like as I read that personally, like I was just sort of like, oh, that's a fascinating, like living in tension moment, right? Of like law and law school. At least I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, as a professor, like I feel like I have some sense of it. It's like it's about primarily, the playing of words, language concepts, all the things that you're basically saying are ephemeral. And it's like law is almost literally like the construction of those to create something solid, right? Our social institutions and realities. And on the exact same token, you're in this meditative state of like, oh, this is ephemeral and not really grounded. And like, I just, I don't know if I'm picking that up right or not, but that was sort of what I was picking up as I was reading this. And I would just want to, again, I would love you to kind of describe that experience, how you navigate that. Also, am I picking that up appropriately or not? And but please, like, put it into your own words and whatnot. But I think sharing a little bit more about that experience, I think, would be really valuable.
Yeah, sure. When I left Germany, I went into I went into the National Guard, and then I was working in Washington for a few years. So I was really busy and just involved and whatnot, and all of this background, this whole retreat residence, it was just sort of lurking in the background. I didn't do anything with it.
Hmm.
But then when I decided to go to law school, all of a sudden I felt myself in an open space again, and I just became conscious again, a sort of another stage of awareness that, yeah, there was something there, but I had no clue what it was. And I just sort of was in kind of a witnessing place with law school, law students, professors, the language, the constructs. I so did not identify with it. Uh, but there I was. Uh, I mean, the reasons I stayed, I didn't really love it at all, but uh, what it just triggered in me another search. And so I just started dropping in again, and I did start reading, for the first time, sort of comparative religion stuff, and
Hmm.
Nietzsche, and so I would just sort of retreat. Again, well, I did what I had to do, but I would in sort of an academic setting, but I just retreated into this deep search, and yeah, it was just another chapter of my own retreat in a way.
Yeah, interesting, right? And so continuing on this, kind of key journey you were on, eventually you did move back to Salt Lake City. And at that time, yes, you were at a dinner party, and eventually kind of sounds like it got jumped on you of like an invitation to join the Mormon church. Maybe you can share a little bit more about that or otherwise. But then I want to give another quote of something that you shared within this. Quote, all things considered, I decided that I should explore this church in a deeper way, even though this was the organization that had abused my family over generations. I had been so certain upon departing Utah that I would be happy to leave the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints far behind. And now I was not so sure. And so that, I mean, I feel like that is such a, I mean, as someone that's definitely done the sort of prodigal son thing myself of growing up Lutheran and, my mom's a deacon in the Lutheran church. So in many ways, I'm like a son of a preacher, right? Like moving away, but then sort of rediscovering, like, I don't know, it hit me a lot, right? And so you particularly described during some powerful moments of prayer as you were starting to engage with this, you stated, quote, you were smothered in an all-embracing darkness, your soul crying out for the God you had doubted, and then feeling a feeling of being engulfed in a sea of light. And you really said that you could start to see the Book of Mormon, not in the terms of its stories, but in its spiritual field, was the language you used. And again, so it just talk us through that experience and that transformation and like how are you starting to integrate all this and otherwise with your own thinking and otherwise.
Yeah, I was still in New York City, going to law school, and sort of a door opened. People I had known from Utah who were in that environment, either at the law school or around. They were all Mormons. They kind of ganged up on me, and just to sort of get rid of them, I said, okay, okay, you know, I'll study it. And my grandmother's brother was president of the Mormon Church. My great grandfather was president of the Mormon Church. My great great grandfather was president of the Mormon Church. So I had this family heritage on one side of my family, but had lived, had grown up outside of that, out of that tradition. And as much as I guess what happened to me is I read the core texts, you know, uh, the Book of Mormon, and just started to pray about it. What opened up to me was less literal truths of particular stories or particular narratives, but opening up to sort of a field of possibility of a particular lens of channeling of truth through some divine reality.
Mm,
And when that opened up to me, in this incredible experience, I all of a sudden felt like this darkness was just going to engulf me. And at that moment, beyond anything that I framed in my mind, I just called out for help. I said, "Help!" I just and I just felt then I felt a rush of a fullness of this field within me, which has unique properties to it. It's a Christian tradition, but with its own um, original lens and sensibility. And so,
mm,
and sort of in a spiritual, in a moment, I felt the field, I held it, and beyond all of the texts, beyond all of the teachings, I held a field and just felt it and said, okay, this is for me. This is for me.
mm.
And but then I struggled with it for quite a while, saying, what happened? This is
Yeah, yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
But nevertheless,
I can feel that ebb and flow here, right?
yeah, I
Stability,
said,
instability.
yeah, there's a resonance here. I'm just being told in a deeper way than my mind can understand that this is what I'm going to do. And so, yeah,
Mm,
so I joined that tradition, and
yeah.
yeah, so that was a really important piece of, foundation for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I can see that. And you're hitting up the next layer, right? I'm going to add another quote again from your book, but I want to just invite you to more because so many people, I mean, myself included, and maybe I can give a bit of a disclosure here explicitly. John has been, I've been taking part in his integral polarity practices online and taking individual coaching with John. And I can just say personally, my John, our interactions have been so helpful and profound for me, particularly for what we're talking about right now. Like a thing I've always struggled with is what can I have faith in? Where is that leap of faith warranted? And so particularly when I read this quote I'm about to give, I was just like, oh my God, yeah, that's it, right? And so I know I'm not the only one. I know there's lots of folks, like me who love science, love the work that is involved, want to do good work and want to like honor that lineage, and yet also feel like, and there's it's that foundation that you found. It's like I haven't fully found it yet if I'm only in that scientific space. That at least is my own experience. So anyway, so I want to bring this back. I'm going to bring a quote that you offered, and I would just love you again to continue to talk through how you worked through this, right? So here's the quote that you offered in your book. I wondered endlessly about whether I was falling prey to what I wanted so much to avoid, making a commitment to a faith based on a desperate need to believe in something. I thought about how I had studied this exact issue since I was a child, that people construct their own realities and are deluded into being convinced that their biases and constructs are real. Exactly. I can't tell you how much I'm like, yes, that's yes. So you then met with, and this is, I think this is so interesting. Like, so you wrote that, and then you shared how you felt called and met with President Smith of the Mormon Church, literally the day before he died. And then and I won't give up more because I think this is your story to tell, but can you tell people about kind of that story and that moment here?
Yeah, well, part of this experience was just sort of a message. This is what you should do, and you should go meet with your uncle, who's president of the church before he dies. And so I wrote him a letter and said, by the way, I'm a, you know, I'm a grandson of your sister, and I've had this experience. I'm supposed to meet with you before I die, before you die. And I didn't hear back from him until many months later when I went back to Salt Lake, and an aunt of mine said, "Well, your uncle got this letter, and he would love to meet with you." And so I went and met with my great uncle. He's very frail. He's in his 90s. Um, he was lucid at least for moments, and while I was with him, he was lucid. And I just said, I've taken the leap here, and I've joined the church, but I'm pretty lost. I don't know. I have a lot of questions about a lot of literal truth claims, and he just looked at me and he said, I didn't know he was quoting a scripture. He just said, he said, if you just commit your life to doing justly and loving mercy and walking humbly with God, which is, and I understood, I mean, that's a scripture, but I think in words, he was sort of saying, if you just try to access the Spirit as you walk through life, do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God, you'll find what you need to know in the way you need to know it. And I just thought, well, okay, I'm okay with that. And yeah, and he passed away the next day, so it was pretty remarkable. And so I kind of committed myself, to do that, to sort of suspend uh, needing to know all of the answers, but to sort of walk that path and have truth unfold to me as I lived into it and felt it, and tried to be engaged and guided by the Spirit in a way that was full of love and doing justly.
That's amazing. And I think you can now start to feel and understand, and let me know if it's wrong, but the living in sacred beauty, right? The title of your book, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a more complex framing of that in the context of IPP, but that's that's very much at the heart of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe we can come back to that when we get to IPP. We're almost there actually in the process.
Okay.
So, but this is great. Continuing on the journey, there is now another big event, right, that happened. So this is skipping a part, and it's a small, beautiful book, and he has two books in particular, actually, and now an edited book of a third on leadership. So there's lots of great resources from John that I will reference and have all of them in the podcast so you can look. But I would really invite you to read the book to kind of hear this beautiful personal journey. So I'm skipping some stuff, but just to jump forward a little bit, there was a pivotal moment that you then shared later on in life when you were at a local workshop in Salt Lake City, led by Genpo Roshi, who was the head of the largest Zen lineage outside of Japan. And you said that he was developing what he called the big mind process, which uses voice dialogues and adaptation of a Jungian therapy. Um, and it sounds like, to say this was a critical moment seems like an understatement based on what you wrote. And this is what you wrote for everyone to know. So, quote, for my part, I was experiencing a deep unity with the entire cosmos, big mind, and wandered out of the session completely disoriented. I was upset because I hadn't gone to this workshop to have my life changed. But here I was with a profound experience that I had never had before, and it changed my life in that moment. Whew. So
Yeah, yeah.
tell us
I
about
mean,
that.
here I was 20 years later, involved in the Mormon Church, as an important part of my life, and I was a practicing attorney, and I gone to a workshop on mediation, not meditation. But the person who organized this workshop was a student of this Genpo Roshi who had developed this radical new process of connect of with his students and his monks. He found that they had breakthroughs almost immediately through this big mind process, and they just said, the organizer of this workshop said, why don't you just try this on people off the street? And if you impact some lawyers, you can impact anybody. So, you know, and being a recovering attorney, I can smile at that. But So in any event, there was a breakout session. There were about 60 of us sitting in this room for about 90 minutes, and he facilitated us into Big Mind, which is, a quality of non-duality, of being, one with everything, and oneness, allness, everything, nothing. And and I think 59 other people got up and said, well, that was kind of interesting. And I was sitting there just deeply in this big mind process, and I mean in this experience of big mind, and it didn't go away, and I was just stuck in it for a couple of weeks. And I thought I was at first I was just really upset. I didn't come to this workshop on mediation to learn some mediation skills to have my life change, but uh I mean, having and that non-duality, non-dual practice is not present in the Mormon tradition, and I didn't have any background with it, but with certain relate, it was had something to do with this deep inner resonance that I found, and uh, and so I wrote this Genpo Roshi a letter from this place of big mind, and he wrote it to his monks. He read it to his monks. This letter I had written as somebody who was writing a letter from an enlightened place, and they got together and they started weeping, that actually this big mind process
Worked.
had enabled somebody to come from this place and even write what turned into sort of a Zen poem. It's like, what should I do? And I met with him. I just said, I don't know what this is. I have a deep resonance with this tradition that I'm in, but I've got to know what this is. I've got to practice it. So I became a very serious student for a number of years.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and now that's getting to this like so you were a student for a number of years and eventually you actually became approved to teach the big mind process. You actually share a funny little story about like he kind of like brought you in and like everyone kind of that jumped in on your back. I don't know if you want to share that or not, but like yeah, so you got committed. You were actually it's what it sounds like is you actually were accepted into teaching this even though you did not commit to the Buddhist path. You know, you were committed to Mormonism and you were explicit with that, right? And so that I feel like that's a critical part of what I think we're learning through now is like, how do we navigate this basically honoring our lineages and honoring different people's traditions and trying to live and work across them such that you can like honor each one with integrity, but also kind of it seems like you were very actively doing this. And so I'd love it if you could tell everyone like, how were you navigating? How do you, yeah, all of that. Just tell us more about that part of this journey of yours.
Yeah, well, Genpo Roshi, he had just come up with this process when I experienced it. So, um, and it became widely known almost immediately, and people were coming from all over the world to learn it, but I just sort of had a knack for it. And he thought he could share it quickly and it'd be all over the world quickly, but then he realized it was because of who he was that he could facilitate this. And
Hmm.
he didn't approve or transmit anybody for 4 years. And he asked me, along with three other people, to be the first transmitted people. And he said, "Are you willing now to take Buddhist vows?" I said, I'm really not. I value this. I want to share it with the world. And he decided, okay, you're approved, but you're prohibited from teaching anybody who's a Buddhist, in the Zen tradition, because you don't have all of the credentials and the framing. You're not doing the final training to really be a teacher. And
Hmm.
there was something within me that I didn't share it purely for very long because I was just being called. I was being very, I was very involved in the integral movement. I was a founding member of Ken Wilber's Integral Institute.
Hmm.
And and so I thought, maybe and this voice dialogue that you use, it's a Jungian therapeutic technique that you use where you speak to aspects of the self. The classic thing would be the vulnerable child or whatnot. And Genpo Roshi had discovered you could speak to transcendent qualities immediately and just open up to it. And I just decided I, I'm going to just try talking to voices and qualities that come up at various stages of development and just see what happens. And so I got a group who was interested in doing that with me. And what I noticed was that whenever a very prominent voice was speaking up, there was its polar opposite wanted to say something.
Hmm.
And so all of a sudden I was teaching I was doing voice dialogue with polarities, and then I found, well, this is interesting, but there's a spiritual centeredness. There has to be. So I found that when two classic archetypal poles came together, in a classic archetypal polarity, there was just a stillness there. It was a transcendent place. And then I found virtues would flow out of that transcendent place of how you use that bandwidth of your consciousness, energy, and function to be in the world in a non-egoic way. And so, and there were a lot of qualities to it that were, echoes of the Mormon traditions. So
Hmm.
for instance, the founder of the Mormon Church, Joseph Smith, would say, uh, by proving contraries, proof is made manifest. He was saying everything that you can understand is partial, and you're going to find something probably beyond your cognitive capacity to understand it, where things can be held, even if they're in a paradox. The Mormons believe in a divine masculine and a divine feminine. They believe in ascending into oneness and then descending into embracing the multiplicity. That's not
Hmm.
something many Mormons from the tradition would understand, that even that language that I'm using, but it's so a lot of that just became uh, unconsciously, I mean, just intuitively, I developed this practice that had a lot of these patterns grounded in this profound non-duality, grounded in developmental psychology, which just sort of became so aligned with sort of a chakra, energy centers in a way.
Yeah.
And uh, it just had its own blend of qualities. It was sort of the unique lens that I have, understanding that it is a construct, it is just a model, but it was my way to connect with the patterns, the fractals of the cosmos. And it's sort of just what, over a period of about 4 years, it became a formal practice. And Genpo Roshi was not thrilled about it, but he said, okay, if this is where you want to take it, take it.
Wow, that's amazing. And I wonder, I know you in the book, you basically say you can't really know IPP without experiencing it. And I can name that, I may bring in a little self-disclosure for myself here. Like, again, I've been working with John, I've been engaging with it. And at this point, it's become a pretty regular part of my meditative and contemplative practice. It's like, um, there are these 21 polarities, and it's like a little cheat sheet, so to speak, that I have this one little page, and I often open it up each morning and just sort of like allow myself to intuitively to flow into whatever polarity seems most calling me in a given moment and otherwise, and then I kind of go through the voice dialogue. And so I can just to share kind of my own testimonial a bit about this, like it's been so helpful on so many levels. From like I used one of the first times I used it and leveraged this, it was helping me to work through actually like an issue going on within my work of like how do I do something that's good for one person versus a community, and kind of navigating that to then eventually using it in different situations within my family and family dynamics. And then even more so lately has been how do I find a stability in my faith, and all those layers from like so deeply, you know, um, quotidian and prosaic to, the transcendent and divine. It's an amazing practice. I've experienced it as such. So with that, before we get into a little bit more about this and maybe transcending into sort of how you're pulling this into leadership, which is where I think we're starting to transition to, I wanted to maybe just invite a moment of you maybe leading me through this, just so folks can have a sense of what this actually is and feels like. And of course, I'll trust you on however you'd like to go, whichever polarity and otherwise you think would be best for this. But if that sounds okay to you, John.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Absolutely, Eric. So I'm thinking, one of the real accessible polarities, there are several that are, very familiar if you're uh, working in any kind of meditative tradition, that are, around breath and perception and awareness and whatnot. But um, I'll start with one that everybody's familiar with. It's the quality of agency, choicefulness, separation, and communion, connection. And so what we do is, I don't speak to sub-identities like you in classic voice dialogue that you do, or in classic big mind process. I speak to functional qualities, so that you're not getting caught in all sorts of sub-identities, but you're getting but you're speaking to authentic aspects of that are functional aspects that are within you. So I'd like to speak to Eric's voice of agency, please. Who am I speaking to?
The voice of agency.
As agency, tell me a little bit about what you do, why you do it.
As the voice of agency, I seek to bring life and love, light, wisdom, goodness into the world.
So has that been, how long have you had that sense of purpose? When did it first start to emerge through you?
More recently, I think if we were orienting around this an earlier version of Eric's earlier voice of this, I would say my orientation was around acting and moving forward with the goals and activities and orientations of uh, what I'm being called into within relations of people I care about, whether that be within my work, whether that be with my family, whether that be in my community and
Uh,
otherwise.
yeah, thank you. Now I'd like to speak to the other polar aspect. I'd like to speak to the voice of communion, please. Who am I speaking to?
The voice of communion.
As communion, what is your role in Eric's life?
As the voice of communion in Eric's life, I invite Eric into connection, into relationality, into love, into appreciation, into growing together.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. As communion, what's your relationship with agency? How do you work together? How would you describe uh, how you play together in a way?
As the voice of communion, I see agency as my friend, as the conduit that helps to guide and bring forth our collective intentions.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to invite now both agency and communion to come together with no separation, no activity, only stillness in a just a sacred healing wholeness. Let's just center into this sacred healing wholeness, utter stillness. And now I'd like to invite a quality of witnessing to arise out of this healing wholeness with a deep quality of empathy and compassion and non-judgment. I'll just call it compassionate witnessing. Who am I speaking to, please?
A voice of compassionate witnessing of the agency and communion together.
So, from your perspective, from this compassionate witnessing perspective, taking a perspective on this dynamic of agency and communion that each of the poles described from their vantage point, is there anything in addition that you notice is going on in this relational field within Eric or generally that the poles themselves didn't perhaps notice or point to?
I think what I can see sometimes is a bit of an approach avoidance. Like both are yearning to be in love and relation and to be flowing together as like a beautiful symphony and harmony. And yet at the same time, they might miscommunicate and it starts to stir up, you know, almost like a dance of like a third being kind of coming and like creating a separation and therefore them becoming a duality, not that non-dual whole. And it's sort of that interesting mix of both yearning for the same thing and yet almost stumbling over each other to get there. And just sort of as a compassionate witnessing, just sort of seeing and feeling the love and appreciation growing for each, and even the way the dance is happening.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to know to return to this quality of healing wholeness and call it by its name. I'd like to speak to the voice of transcendent trust, please. In this relational field where fear is always present, I'd like to speak to this quality where there is no fear, only stillness. Deep trust where you can find no fear. Trust in the divine, the ultimate, your higher self, however you find this place of deep transcendent trust. Now let's just settle into this. There any words that describe this?
Peace, calm,
Mhm. Yeah,
effortless action, flow, and of course, trust,
yeah.
faith.
There's a deep transcendent attitude that arises from this transcendent trust, a transcendent hope. I'd like to speak to transcendent hope, please. Who am I speaking to?
Transcendent hope,
As
the voice.
transcendent, yeah, transcendent hope. What are some of your gifts?
The voice of transcendent hope. I invite the attunement into ever new possibilities, ever new orientations into greater joy, goodness, love, and what we the both the agency and the commune are feeling drawn to together and dancing together towards.
Yeah, thank you. There's a quality of action, a virtue of doing that also arises from this still point of transcendent trust. And when transcendent hope are available, a transcendent love. I'd like to speak to transcendent love, please. Who am I speaking to?
Transcendent love.
As transcendent love, say a little bit about your qualities and gifts.
This is where really that effortless flow of just abundant opportunity and action comes into being and becoming and doing in the world. This is where the magic, connects the sort of immanent and transcendent into one.
Yeah, 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 thank you. Um, we could continue to play this out for a while, but I think given the time that we have, it might be good just to maybe debrief a little bit to share
Yeah.
that framework, what was happening there.
Yeah, please do. And thank
Yeah,
you for that. That I always love being guided through that with you.
yeah, yeah, and there are other aspects to it. We would might continue on, but this is this primary relational polarity. Uh, when you hold it in any polarity like this in an immature way, you're kind of embedded in one and suspicious of the other. Say, for instance, I'm all about freedom and agency and action and entrepreneurship, or I'm deeply invested in community and social justice. And somehow they're looking at each other as somehow pathetic and evil. And then then a person can learn to sort of move back from one to the other, which might be appropriate in a given situation. And then in terms of a trajectory of maturity, you begin to hold them paradoxically, you don't quite understand it, but then they begin to flow into that. And that's and these are very measurable stages um, in terms of human development, adult development, that you can pinpoint where somebody is and where you can help them on the trajectory of maturity, where you learn that they need one another. And um, and so in the context of the foundational principles of flourishing and flourishing leadership, there's so much science around this. You need to recognize people's agency. You need to have a sense of shared purpose together. When they come together, when you have a sense of communion in your agency, you naturally have a sense of purpose that's greater than yourself. If you have a sense of agency in your communion as a leader, you recognize how important it is to have a shared purpose but to recognize the gifts and contributions of different people and to blend all of that in. And and you realize that if you are embedded in communion, you can lose any sense of separate conscience. If you're embedded in agency, you become isolated and disconnected. But if you get to a place of trust, this deep place of trust, it paradoxically helps you become more, this place of no fear, you can become more present to see more clearly what there is actually to be careful about. And there are this quality of hopefulness, which is not the traditional quality of hoping for things. It's from this place, anything's possible. This is a place of abundance and possibility. And this love has no limitations to it, no qualifications to it. It just flows. It's there. And and as opposed to the poles, which need to learn to come together and work together, you can't have too much deep trust in this way. You can't have too much hopefulness. You can't have too much love. So these transcendent virtues, you just live into them. You center in this stillness, and every still point is essentially the same place. It's being one with the transcendence is probably some quality of non-duality, and there's a whole non-dual practice of different qualities of non-duality in this context. And ultimately, after feeling these virtues, we can come down to a oneness that's inherent in this wholeness and re-invite these qualities of agency and communion to re-emerge from a prior oneness with a deep sense of their interbeingness, where they just automatically begin saying, I mean, we're just here to be in service of light, love, and life. I mean, to
Starting
echo where
orientation.
you were coming from before we went through all of this.
Yeah.
And what's the self's agenda here? I mean, it's nice, it's interesting, but this is what we're really about. So it's and the interesting thing is, uh, so many of these polarities are aligned with research relating to what results in individual and collective human flourishing and even ecosystemic flourishing. That's why I'm using the metaphor, the framework of flourishing for a lot of what I do in leadership and what IPP is all about. So that was just a little bit of a quick debrief to explain to people what this territory was. It isn't just a list of flourishing principles, but it's an ecosystem existing within other ecosystems, connected to ecosystems locally to globally, and if you can come from a place of centeredness in the absolute and then be in flow in the relative, you're working with the polarity of the absolute and the relative becoming one in flow together. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's just a quick download. You can tell I don't get very excited about it.
And I get excited about it too. I mean, I think it's just beautiful, and I'm so glad you've created this. I mean, just again to give a bit of that testimonial piece of this, like it really is just it's been so helpful. And I think one of the things I really appreciate about it's so practical and pragmatic. It's like, and maybe for those of you who are just listening and John got into something that felt deeply abstract to you, I'll just say straight up, that's normal. Like I'm pretty sure like that's just part of the process. This is what it's meant by kind of that developmental path. It's not necessarily a good or bad. It's just we all have our own lineages and histories, and with this, we have certain things that we need naturally attune to, and then there's certain things that we might just have shadow work, is the language from Jung that John has picked up that I've picked up more and more as well. Just those spots where we haven't necessarily fully integrated all of these different parts of us and anchored in these different things, and so I personally have found just John's practice so helpful and deeply pragmatic. And in particular, if you're hearing something, you're like, man, that sounded too abstract, just try a different polarity. I think it's basically the a good starting point, or like just play with it in a different way, right? But yeah, at least you could get a sense of it, a feel for this, because it now is setting up, moving us into the next stage. Something I'm really excited about that John's been moving into is this a new launching program he's going to be starting in January. And this is actually something I mentioned at the end of episode 4. I'm going to update it actually so the link is proper now because it wasn't up when I first put this up. But although I knew it was coming, of course. So your new work, another way forward for leadership and movement for around leadership and flourishing, right? So it really speaks directly to the challenges that leaders are facing right now, the polarization, the shadow dynamics and movements, the difficulty holding all this complexity. So yeah, I particularly love to just ground us now. Like, what made you feel called to really go into this part of this, to start to do this leadership training and work? I know you have a long history, and I'm going to unpack that a bit, but just let's get a little bit of an intro to kind of this leadership aspect of your work.
Well, I think that the developmental lens um, is just pretty much absent in society generally, and it's just one lens. But to me, it may be the most important. It's clearly one of the most important lenses. And without understanding it, you don't really understand some of the challenges that we're having. You can see that people who are sort of at a modernist level of development, which are most people, or sort of an entry into that, because of fear, they're retreating into a more primitive stance of tribalism. And for people who are more uh, progressive and working with the social construction of reality and all of that type of a thing, uh, they don't have the structure or the wisdom to hold that deeply.
Yeah.
And even though the narrative is include everybody, be inclusive of everybody, it really isn't. It's inclusive of the highly marginalized and of those who, and so it ends up being very patronizing. And so, but there's another half step up where you have some structure around this and some further developmental stages where leadership can, rather than tearing us apart, can bring us together and also be have the qualities that you absolutely need to have for the future of sort of a global centric awareness. But embedded in all of this, one of the gifts of IPP, I just got involved in this Harvard Flourishing Network about 5 or 6 years ago, is IPP. They all say to be a leader, you should do the inner work. Well, this seems to be some inner work that relates very well and is very supportive of research-based flourishing principles. And so I've been invited into this flourishing network. I convene the leadership once a month. I'm the flourishing facilitator of the whole network and the spirituality and flourishing interest group. I lead the task force on um, uh, spirituality and civic engagement and leadership. So,
Yeah.
and flourishing just seems to be, like Bhutan has gross national happiness. The world should have gross national flourishing. It's a holistic understanding, individual, collective, and ecosystemic flourishing.
Hmm.
They're all interrelated. So teaching these flourishing principles that can be supported by IPP practice, but then saying for people who are wanting to move into societal stewardships where all leadership is falling apart, and I explain it in terms of this developmental framework complemented by other perspectives. We need people of a certain developmental capacity and some related skills uh, to help try to hold civilization together. And it probably won't be successful, but we need a critical mass of leadership who can um, hold together and take us into another era of civilization that has to have local to global understanding and ecosystemic understanding and working with complex adaptive systems. And yet, in the midst of all of that complexity, the simplicity of being able to connect with everybody and recognize everybody has a concern, everybody deserves respect, and you can weave things together and make public policy possible that just otherwise isn't with some of these capacities or some of this training. And so my passion is just to try to start teaching this and connecting with all sorts of other groups I can find who are doing anything similar so we can start creating a critical mass of leadership for the future, as well as just pushing this whole flourishing narrative because it's a it's a beautiful next step in understanding how we can flourish individually and collectively and ecosystemically, that you don't need sophistication. The basics of it, anybody can do it, but in this developmental context where there's another level of where I say, but for significant stewardship, we need these additional capacities.
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to tag a few things, particularly for those of you who might be listening and be like, well, I've heard a lot about, John's spiritual development and the IPP practice. Well, what about the leadership pieces? And in brief, I'd invite you to read his book. He has a lot of leadership skills and experiences. I'm just going to name a few of the key, I think, some of the life experiences I imagine is informing this, just so folks can kind of orient to this. And then after this, John, I'm going to ask you, I'd love to describe a little bit more about those leadership qualities that you're looking towards teaching and otherwise in the class. But just to make sure folks have a bit of an orientation about you, right? Like you shared in your book early on in life, you were both, I love that you had this dual dynamic even early on of you were both a protester of the Vietnam War and you were a policeman managing the protests. And so like connecting with different people and groups and sort of having that role shift to, you've had numerous roles throughout your life, like particularly as a public health person. I love to hear that you were the co-chair of both the U.S. Healthier Cities and Communities Network, and then eventually the Healthy Cities Global Action Network. You founded nonprofits such as the Salt Lake Civil Network, and you're actively involved in Salt Lake interfaith roundtables and in civic engagement groups, which includes both faith-based and non-faith groups. So very much honoring and supporting atheism, figuring out how to actually have spiritual conversations that honor the Constitution, but also allow for us to have this sort of spiritual development. And more recently, you started the Unify initiative, and that's been connecting you in with the Flourishing program at Harvard and otherwise. And you've been connecting with a variety of folks and researchers and otherwise, like Terry O'Fallon and James Ritchie Dunham and others. And so basically, just to name it, John's got a lot of leadership experience and practice. Like I just wanted to put that out, and make sure everyone knew that. But with that, I'd love to now tell us more about that. So I think we're getting a bit of sense of that IPP practice and sort of the individual practice. I'd love to hear a little bit more about like what are some of the principles and things that you're picking up and that are like, and I know there's a new edited book that you have one of the chapters on that James Ritchie Dunham was one of the key editors and others on, right? But tell us a bit about the sort of leadership aspects that you're kind of thinking about and particularly kind of inviting and teaching in this upcoming course you're going to be offering with others.
Yeah, well, it's thinking that we were coming into this conversation is why I facilitated that particular polarity because it's so central to the foundational principles of flourishing and flourishing leadership. If you could boil it down just to two principles for utter simplicity, is uh, and all of the data shows this, all of the studies and the best work comes out of Oxford University and their character-based leadership institute, is strong character that is grounded in being trustworthy, connected to a deep source of trust, which helps you, which helps you have the integrity to be trustworthy
Hmm.
and to create safe places for safe spaces so people don't feel so vulnerable. So you can create a container, which I know you've talked about as part of your work, is how do you create safe containers?
Hmm.
And then out of that, what's flourishing? Well, it's love. It's creating a caring environment in an environment of trust, and everything is possible in that regard. But as a leader, you have to have experience working with a collective, and the collective ultimately isn't just this boundary or this boundary. It's realizing that I'm connected to all of mankind. I'm connected to all of life.
Yeah.
And if I'm connected to all of life, I see that everything's connected in ecosystems. And if they're connected in ecosystems, I've got to be able to, if not be an expert in it, at least understand complex adaptive systems and work with people. And in that context, with all and with agency and communion coming together, see all of the beautiful perspectives of everybody, and how do you weave that into the collective? I mean, it's a framework that creates hopefulness, it creates an environment of love, it creates a spirit of abundance and possibility, and that's at the foundation
Mm,
of flourishing. And if you're practicing flourishing, you can't practice it alone. So by definition, if you're practicing flourishing, you're becoming a flourishing leader.
mm,
And there's just some very basic foundational principles, but there are all sorts of lenses to it, and there are all sorts of studies around it. And one of the really important findings is, and particularly as they've studied, there's a 5 year flourishing study, global flourishing study that Harvard and Baylor University did together with the help of the Gallup Foundation. People have very different ideas culturally of what flourishing is. And so in its own polarity is what are the most foundational principles of science research-based flourishing, and what's the unique flourishing that this person or this culture has, and how can they inform each other? How can they
mm,
enrich each other? And so it's going to be an endless quest of honoring the wisdom and the traditions of cultures and the indigenous and the people in the Southern Hemisphere, all sorts of perspectives, complemented by basic research-based principles of what creates flourishing people and for individually, collectively, ecosystemically.
yeah.
And that's sort of the framing of it, and the very foundation of it are these principles that are found in this one polarity that we worked with of agency and communion, grounded in trust, with hope and possibility and love, paying due attention in your sense of purpose to the community and the agency, conscience, needs, vision, and gifts of everybody. So, that's a really quick overview, but the thing that's been fascinating is to find that of these 21 polarities, the most basic ones fit so well into not only just the traditional virtues, but a lot of research about leadership, how to handle power, how to negotiate contraries, you might call it.
Mhm.
And although IPP is just a couple of handfuls of universal polarities, you just develop the instinct of how to bring together opposing things to hold them and find a spiritual centeredness in it, uh, and to hold a container of trust to hold the tension, and inform it by hope and love and abundance. So
Mm.
I'm just kind of rambling here, Eric, but I just to
I
just
don't
to
think
give
that's
you
rambling.
an initial sense, your listeners, an initial sense of what this is about, what it feels like.
It's wonderful. I appreciate it. And I'm excited just to say explicitly, I'm planning on taking the course and I'm really looking forward to it. Um, the one
Yeah,
last
so
thing.
I'm
Oh,
doing my first course to just sort of, starting in January, 4 month course, 4 hours once a month with some additional connecting and teaching in between to sort of say, what's the problem here? Why is everything falling apart? Here's this gift of flourishing. How does it fit into the perspectives we have? And then what if you're interested in having significant stewardship? It isn't just in government, but a stewardship in society that has a sense of local global to it.
yeah.
These are some additional qualities, capacities that you need, and some skills that you need, that are clustered in about 5 or 6 ways.
I love it. And to state it explicitly, I'm going to put the link for the website on ours so everyone can see it and find it. And, you know, I will personally give an endorsement of I haven't taken it yet, but I'm nearly certain this is going to be an amazing experience. And I'm
Yeah.
personally really looking forward. So my
Oh, thank
endorsement of
you.
actually showing up myself.
Yeah.
So,
Well, somebody needs to email me to register for it. So, if you could leave my email
okay,
address,
I'll
I'd
put your
be
email
there.
in. Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
If that's okay, I'll do that as a way to.
Yes. Super. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. The last one I want to get into, and then I would love to actually start playing a little bit about some of the ideas that have been explored in this podcast. So you were gracious enough to listen to episode 4 in here. It was really about cultural evolution, particularly where I mentioned your work. But before we get to that, there's one last area I would love to just explore. We brought this concept up a few times now, but it's the notion of shadow work. And in particular, I was hearing a lot of the positive and the beautiful areas of with this. And it's also the sort of it seems like a lot of times those things, there's something that gets us stuck, and it's like that's the general language of the shadow work. And so I would just love it if you could just talk a little bit about kind of what do you, how do you understand shadow work? How is that going to be incorporated into this training and IPP and anything else, just to help folks kind of attune to that, your approach to handling that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, each one of these polarities, you reach a new polarity at each emergent stage of development, and it becomes a little rarefied in terms of fewer and fewer people having access to a particular rarefied polar dynamic. But where the action is where everybody lives. And say, for instance, the power polarity, which is just above the relational polarity, every relational environment has power dynamics to it. So they come in pairs. What's the new quality that comes online? What's the structure you need to deal with it and work with it well? So the power polarity is, control and submission. And when you work with that and come together in stillness in this healing wholeness, and you invite that quality of compassionate witnessing, you start to take a look not only of just the dynamics that are there, but we're all victims of trauma individually, culturally, our civilization, and everything else. And from this witnessing place, coming from a place of wholeness and healing and safety, with compassion and empathy and non-judgment, things that are repressed and stuck and undeveloped begin to poke their heads up a little bit and feel just a little bit safer.
Mm,
And by doing nothing, you're not only starting to do shadow work by things that are hidden starting to become visible within that particular bandwidth, or you might just things might just open up to you. Shadow work is inherently built into this through this compassionate witnessing that you have. And because you're coming from a healing wholeness, there is one of the assumptions of IPP is we all have an inner wholeness to us and a healing quality that if we just open up to it, we can be healed. And it's just by passive witnessing and making these qualities feel safe, they're drawn to healing wholeness. But one way or another, and for good and for bad in the short run, things start to emerge. And so just by working with these polarities that are part of your everyday life, uh, shadow work is happening, particularly through this witnessing step,
mhm.
and trying to create safety for things that have been hidden or repressed. They just begin to appear. And, there are a number of therapists who are trained in IPP, who use that as a framework to help people who find they've got a huge problem. They're just completely traumatized and they need to deal with it. There are professionals that can sort of take you in that transition from having the practice to give you some professional help. And it's a very spiritual thing too. Spiritual counselors who can help sense the moral injury that we're all experiencing by um, having things that are contrary to what we think are right and good and true happening all around us all of the time. To recognize that this is what it is, and we have to deal with it. If we understand that we're dealing with it, there's some strategies to do that.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. Great. Well, we're running closer to the end, so this has been a great journey, John. I'm really grateful for this. The last thing I'd love to do is maybe just a quick little peer review, honestly, sort of like what you've been seeing, because I mean, just to name it, I feel very drawn to your orientation and goals and otherwise, and I'm interested in contributing in my own in the ways that I can, right, to kind of create this future role of flourishing. So with this, I would love to just get some, you were gracious enough to listen to episode 4 of the podcast, and particularly me kind of revealing kind of the work from neuroscience and particularly the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett and others building on her work, basically the way in which we construct reality, right? That thing that you intuited when you were a kid, still amazing, right? And then, but I would love to just hear kind of what struck you about that and like what might be valuable here, but also is there any kind of shadow work or things we want to be thoughtful of as you kind of was hearing this for based on all your life wisdom and experiences and otherwise.
Yeah, well, I thought um, I'm one of your uh, gifts, Eric. Um, and we've worked together enough that I know kind of your developmental center of gravity. You come from a place where you can put together very diverse theoretical things that don't seem to anybody else to link, but you find linkages, sort of um, um, combined paradigms that haven't been combined before, and you do a lot of that. And there's some richness in your work that's really, really beautiful. And having somebody to guide us who can put seemingly unrelated fields together in rich ways is, it's the way of the future. It's going to be the way that we really learn. And the richness of this social construction of reality and the detail that you go into that, uh, I kind of look at things in the four Wilbur quadrants. There's sort of an internal collective and an
Hmm.
external collective. That's the internal collective.
Yeah.
And then there's the individual quadrants at the top, which is sort of your internal inner work. And then there's the studying the external. And sort of the external singular study is sort of the neuroscience. You're seeing all the science there, and
Right.
you have this richness of the social construction of reality, and something that I pick up in what you express, and not so much theoretically in this episode 4, but there's even a deeper constructed nature, not just of the social construction of reality, but from a deeper place you can see the constructed nature of even language itself. I mean, nothing
Hmm.
is nothing is solid.
Yeah.
And so in the social construction of reality, there are some real things and some real environments that are creating the constructed nature of our worldviews, and how we emerge and how we relate to one another and the cultural context for that. One of the important aspects of that is to have structure in it. You can get lost at an early, what I would call this is a fourth person perspective theory, where everything is relative and everything is constructed. But a half step up, you can see there are patterns, there are emergent hierarchies, if not appropriate cultural hierarchies, where you can pick up patterns where there is maturity, there is a way to hold this, there is order to some extent uh, to all of this. So that whole discussion is just very rich, and you bring in, the neuroscience pieces that complement it from this upper right hand quadrant. One of the things that I think would further enrich the conversation, and you bring up the upper left quadrant, the inner work that you do. I mean, that's part of who you are and what you do. But I would say, for instance, the AI explosion,
Yeah.
that's a lower right structural thing that's happening to all of us. It's going to take over all of our systems and processes,
Yeah.
and it is already transcending our cultural understandings, our inner capacity to understand,
Yeah.
the research. I mean, there's this lower right-hand quadrant that's just blowing up. I mean, it's already huge. I mean,
Yeah.
every MBA student, for instance, who's studying how to analyze financial statements and what those jobs, I mean, so many jobs are in the process of disappearing in this moment in another 5 years. And we're going to have to catch up culturally in terms of how do we relate to this. And I think you have created a framework, for a beautiful conversation. And IPP sort of plays into this as well. In this relational polarity, what's the culture that's being created by this communion, and how do we understand how deeply we're impacted by that in terms of our understanding of agency and thought and consciousness.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought it was very rich and worth studying. And there's so many things, so many references. I could study this for months before I could really get my arms around the complexity that you're talking about. But I would also suggest uh, paying even deeper attention to this lower right, particularly the AI revolution is
Yeah.
changing everything. And no, but kudos, congratulations. I just thought it was beautiful work, beautiful references, beautiful summarizing, of some key individual and collective work that you can do, the inner work that you can do, the we space work that you can do. Yeah, I just think it's so rich, so rich. but there it has enough complexity to it. I think you have to take it seriously and spend some time with it. All I know
Yeah.
is that I'm stimulated and I'm excited, and all the references that you'd had, I'm going to have to study this a long time before I fully get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, beautiful.
I
And it
appre
reflects, and it reflects this cross-paradigmatic capacity that you have, and really tying into the deep wisdom of the constructed nature of the culture that we're in, and the individual realities that we're in, and we tend not to appreciate or understand don't have a way to witness it, to have a meta view on it. And this gives a beautiful meta view to that.
Thank you, John. I so appreciate that. That means a great deal coming from you. So, um, and I appreciate the invite into thinking more about the Leroy quadrant. And for those who are interested in the Wilbur quadrants, there's actually a sister piece that I wrote. There, it's actually
Okay.
up. I actually did. It's actually sort of me teeing up what I'm hoping to work on in season two. Is actually starting to dig more deeply into the sort of the different ways of knowing and how to kind of create. I'm paraphrasing from James Davison Hunter's book Democracy and Solidarity, the agreements for holding our disagreements. But that's a sort of a to be to continued. But I appreciate and I love the invitation there, particularly into that. And also, before we end, there's one last thing that I want to kind of flip because to me, I think there's a both and polarity here that I want to name that I feel like you've been teaching me about, which is that just because I can, weave a beautiful story together of connecting everything doesn't mean that's actually the thing that's going to help, right? It's like and so, like the flip and the praxis I've been trying to work on more and more, and I feel like you've been helping me with quite a bit, just to name transparently, is this sort of a practice of attunement into the moment of like, kind of knowing that this now and each one of these now and this sacred presence of we and connectedness is, you know, if we it was something you even shared in your book, right? During your stories, like this would often be the thing. I was like, okay, what can I do? I can do what I can do here and to like just to tune into now in every moment now, right? But then being able to hold like big mind in the now and like tuning, like so yeah. If I could just end with a little bit of like that practice of sort of like now attunement and like how do you invite that and how might that be in relation to sort of this big grandiose theorizing I'm doing and how can we hold those in a healthy relationship together? If you have any advice on that.
Yeah. Well, let me just do like a 1 minute meditation,
Okay.
to sort of open up a door here, just centering in a deep physical relaxation in your breath and in your body. And that creates a foundation for a mental and emotional calm, and then even a deep place of equanimity. And one quality, the attitude, a way to hold anything from this place of deep equanimity, is a deep quality of acceptance of this moment. Not that we like it, not that is inhibiting us, but by becoming one with what is, we automatically move into flow. By saying yes to what is, we can say yes with so much power and depth to what it is we want to do. And unless we say yes to what is, if we stay in denial, we can't find that equanimity. We can't be properly present to see what is, to see what's arising. And this is framed so beautifully in the control and submission, the power polarity, where submission is submitting to what is becoming one with what is being in flow with what is. And control is working intimately with that. With my big yes, with what I want to do, how do I interface with what is and build on that and create possibility here? So that I can come from the deep still point of this polarity of deep inner peace and humility and find this place of effortlessness and inspired influence that can flow out of honoring what is, honoring our deepest yes, and having them play together and work together that we might come from a non-egoic place inspired by light and love and life to engage and inspire to influence in the world, realizing there's equal power in accepting what is and working and flowing with what is, as well as saying yes in a very integrated way to what it is we want to accomplish. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks. And that's grounded so much, Eric, in being present. What's happening right now? What's arising in this moment? And once we find that stillness, that inner stillness, just very much grounded in our bodies and our in the life force that's around us. Uh, there's too much static to be clear about it. But when you clear that channel and you're present, you connect into the wisdom of life that's just within you. You're full of love, uh, and you're inspired from your deepest place of inspiration. You allow light to flow in to embrace everything in love and to be life affirming in everything that you do. And in a way that honors begins to have us try to be open to the wisdom of the life wisdom of the indigenous tradition, the loving tradition uh, of the relational divine, and the beautiful inspiration that flows out of oneness of the practices that are grounded in unity and source and non-duality and in a sense even emptiness. Um,
Yeah, there it is. Thank you.
yeah, and I would maybe just say as a last thing, and there's a harmonic in IPP that you can find in multiple dimensions, but sort of the transcendent harmonic is that if you hold the wholeness, the healing wholeness that is there, and you are connected to the beautiful source of oneness, the light, the love and the life that flow out of that source of beauty and that source of sacredness. They come together to help us walk in sacred beauty by working through the light, the love, and the life. Ultimately, both of those ends are non-duality, the wholeness and the oneness and the beauty of the source, the healingness of the source, and the resonances, the multiple resonances of working with things that are still, things that are flowing, things that are concrete in a transcendent quality, light, love, and life grounded in the healing wholeness and the beauty that arises out of oneness to learn to walk in sacred beauty.
There's the walking in sacred beauty. Beautiful. I think that is a great place for us to end. The very last question would be if there's any resources or references that you'd like to offer to the audience.
Well, because I'm really trying to get the word out with regard to this to flourishing uh, as a framework that I'm trying to work within because I think it's coming online. Uh, if you go to the website globalflourishingstudy.com, there's not only the results of a global flourishing study, but links to dozens and dozens of papers that are now just coming out around
Hmm.
what does flourishing mean through different disciplines and different perspectives. And one thing you mentioned in your episode 4 was Jim Ritchie Dunham's book Agreement. And what that is if what are complex adaptive systems and how do I work with this and what's the simplicity of it? I mean, it's grounded in being in agreement. I mean, it's where you're, but what it does is it tries to, in the most user-friendly way possible, say, here's how you reach agreement to be together in a flourishing way, in a way that you're recognizing the system's nature of everything, so you have net positive uh, benefits that come out of it. And there is this new Leadership for Flourishing book that's just been Oxford University Press, where 20 22 different chapters with multiple lenses on flourishing, and it's a wonderful resource to give you a sense of this field and how very different people in different disciplines are working with that flourishing lens. So I just sort of curated that those resources for that particular purpose.
That's perfect. And of course, I will also have John's books. I'll put up the links to his IPP Institute and otherwise. But thank you so much, John. This has been just it's such a joy.
Oh, it's been a privilege, Eric. Thanks so much. I'm honored, given the rich work you were doing, that you would, invite me into this space with your colleagues and friends.
Oh, truly my pleasure and mutually beneficial and flourishing for sure.
Thanks so much. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you too. What a gift to sit and learn with John. I hope you enjoyed it too, hearing his story of discovery in Germany, breathing through and understanding his amazing initial understanding of the constructed nature of reality of a child into growing into how he could actually learn that through meditation and cultivating that physical vibrancy and feeling that rock bottom. I personally was just always amazed as I learned about John's work of really just holding and seeing how what he was learning through this meditative tradition, it wasn't contradictory to the neuroscience. It felt to me deeply essential and complementary. And in particular, as a personal exposure, I'm really seeing how these contemplative practices are showing up as a complementary way of knowing and engaging with consciousness, and therefore really helping me to understand my praxis as a psychologist. So, with this, I would just want to highlight a few of, I think, some of the key gifts that I think John was giving us, right? He was offering us these polarities, how they're non-dual and how they're whole, the agency and the communion, and particularly as a foundational one that he offered. Um, how we navigate these as living tensions, knowing that they're flowing and dynamic, and yet, if you can hold them, you can land on a sacred stillness. And in so doing, find your pathway to flow through this in relationships, in organizations, and ultimately how we can relate with each other across people, place, and planet. These still points, they're holding these different vitalities and allowing them to flow and yet still finding that steadiness, almost like the eddy in a river, right? Like it looks like a stillness and yet it is this constant movement, right? Or it's like a wave looking as if it's steady and yet it's this constant flowing within it, right? That's what I feel when I experience his work. And so I just hope you are picking up a little bit about that. I also think John's work was really beautiful to see the ways in which he was honoring multiple ways of knowing. For example, really being true to his Mormon tradition and growing into that, while also learning from Genpo Roshi and getting trained as in this big mind practice and sort of learning from the Zen Buddhist lineage, while also being very true about who he was, right? I also think he is very good at grounding in the developmental psychology work and increasingly being drawn towards what we're learning from the system science and how to think in that. Very much the invitation he was getting to us at the end. My experience of this is that this just really richens and creates both breadth and depth of our understanding and experience of reality, holding all of this. And for me, I really do appreciate his life, love, and light framework to help us to work through these. And so, with this, I would invite you. There were a bunch of resources that he offered, and all of these are available on the Negotiating Reality Substack page. Please go there, and you can find this episode, and you'll find all the links that he suggested there. This includes for his IPP Institute, the Global Flourishing Study, and other sorts of references from that, his Unify work, and also the recommended books that I was reading and quoting from him. Before we end, though, I want to actually shift this into a bit of a personal turn because one of the things that John did at the very end was inviting me to think more deeply about AI and our relationship with it. And particularly given that I do a lot of work in digital health and build algorithms and otherwise, I've been pondering this since our invitation. And I wanted to come back with a bit of a reflection and maybe a bit of a starting point. Now, this is very much just me being open and kind of sharing what I am processing. I'm not saying I have answers here, but I want to kind of frame how I'm feeling and experiencing it. And the way I want to do this actually is through song, partially because that's just partially of who I am. I was trained as a musician and I love to sing. And there's a song in particular that I think I find really helpful to help me understand this. And so here I'm going to sing little parts of it and then we'll talk through as we sing it. Come with me and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. Take a look and you'll see into your imagination. Isn't that beautiful? I like when I first heard that song, I was just like, oh, wow, that sounds so nice. It's pretty. I was watching Willy Wonka and going into this beautiful dreamscape of what he was doing, right? Like, just the amazing promise and like this amazing superpower we as humans have to create social reality in line with what we shared in episode 4, right? But then to create these beautiful worlds and these new possibilities and to bring new emergence into existence that didn't previously exist. That is so beautiful. And it's such a beautiful invitation. And I want you to hold that as there is deep truth in that beauty. It is genuinely beautiful and powerful. And with that, these theories, these frameworks, these conceptual frameworks, all of this work that we do, there is a deep, beautiful of all of beauty in all of this. And I could hope you could hear this was the part that John was flagging as something that he sees in me that I bring beauty, this sort of capacity to do synthesis and cross paradigmatic work and to help create those connections, right? I love it. I find so much fun with it. It is a joy and it is something I get deeply drawn into. And yet, as I hold that, I also am increasingly feeling the need for a counterweight, something that helps me to tether to the real world and make sure I can know the difference between symbols of reality and reality itself. With that, let's continue with the song. If you want to view paradise, simply look around and view it. Anything you want to, do it. Wanna change the world? There's nothing to it. It's seductive, isn't it? The promise that we can reshape reality through imagination alone. Isn't that, and isn't this sort of like, you know, the invitation, want to change the world? There's nothing to it. Like, what a common frame and parlance, particularly as someone that, did my postdoc in Silicon Valley and at Stanford. And, I consider myself both a member of and a former recovering member of this digital community. I can see the beauty and I love the people that I work with and the frame, and I can feel this desire to do good with all of this. There's that allure, though, right? There's a risk. And this risk, I think, was really well described by Tyson Yunkaporta in his book, Right Story, Wrong Story. Right? The way I think about it is this idea that when stories and concepts and all of this beautiful imagination gets denatured, acontextual, arelational, it's no longer connected with the people and the communities that can hold them and allow them to actually be living. And they almost become like living dead ideas. I think of them almost as like zombies, these sort of things, these memes floating around in social media and connecting to us and like pulling us in to look at our phones and all this other stuff, or the AI tool that invites us to commune with it, right? All of these are these denatured ideas and concepts that, again, can be quite beautiful. But it sets up a real risk where they might not actually connect us to the more than human world. They might actually suck us away from that, right? To continue that, think about the next line of the song. There is no life I know to compare with pure imagination. Living there, you'll be free if you truly wish to be. Do you feel it? Isn't that starting to feel a little bit true and dangerous? Right? Like if you have read Ready Player One or Ready Player Two, right? Or you have those who are like interested in actually having their minds separated, such that they can live in these, simulacrum, these matrices, these places where we've replaced reality with symbols of reality, these complex algorithms. Right? There's something beautiful. There really is. Again, I love this stuff, right? I'm drawn to it and I'm scared of it at the same time. And I think it sets up a certain degree of humility. Like, basically, when we're living there free in pure imagination, are we free? Are you free? Are we, or maybe we trapped in the concepts and the social realities that we've grown into? That's the question. That's what I feel John was inviting me to start to ponder. And I wanted to just sit and reflect on it in this final stage, in this as a starting of an offering to honor John's invitation to me. Um, so I just wanted you to sit with that. And then as a last piece, I want to turn back to an invitation into a practice, at least something that's helped center me. Course, I really would invite you. If this is kind of, I'm basically trying to make a case for why I think a practice of integral polarity practice and otherwise is a valuable complement, particularly for scientists, particularly for psychologists, particularly for those who are really love ideas and to love playing with ideas. It's not bad, it's beautiful. There's nothing wrong with it as long as you can then tether it to reality, to life, to relations, to people, to each other. Right. And so I would invite you into John's practice. And if that is doesn't feel right to you, and even if you're feeling a little trepidation, I have an alternative potential starting point that I think is complementary. One of John's core polarities is the life polarity, he calls it. And it's basically this notion of contraction and expansion as a non-dual whole. And you can think about this very much as breathing. Breathe in. We expand as we draw the world into ourselves. Breathe out. We contract as we offer ourselves back to the world. These aren't opposites in conflict. They're complementary movement in the dance of life. And and it makes sense from what we know from physics and geosciences. So I would invite you back to in episode 2, I created a complementary episode, which was a meditation, a breathing exercise that was in helping us to breathe and feel our connection to the rest of life, to plants, to the atmosphere, to ancient geological and biological processes and flows. That fits with what we know from geoscience and is honestly complementary with creation stories. It's helping us to invite us to get this connected to reality. So, this, coming back to it, this is the personal tension and why I was so drawn to John as a teacher. He was he is offering something that I think is complementary and helps to balance out my love of pure imagination and these frameworks with a deep integrative wholeness and connection, a both and. And so I just wanted to share that. I wanted to end with that, just to kind of invite you to really understand why I find so much appreciation and value and how I feel I really need this counterbalance. This was the dynamic that John and I were in at that very end of this. And so I just wanted to offer you this as another possibility of different ways to play with this, because I know this is not necessarily as normative. And if it is normative, great. I'm stoked that this is part of your practice. And if not, I just wanted to share this at least where I am in my journey. So as a final closing, I just kind of want to say, like, this is what I think, how I'm understanding how I can live into that invitation to walk in sacred beauty, as John says, honoring our wholeness as oneness and our ground of being, engaging with this concrete flowing stillness, all of that. Recognizing and holding together things that seem in contradiction, such as transcendent and immanent, personal and collective, theoretical and practical, and finding and living in that dynamic stillness and foundational vibrancy, seeing these opposites as dancing in one. With that, thank you, John, for your guidance and wisdom and teachings for me. And thank you for listening. Until next time, I hope you can find that stillness that John is inviting so that we all might do better at walking in the sacred path, beauty towards life, love, and light.